Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Literary Lore. Today we'll be starting a series on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Like most literary works we'll be covering on this channel, it is in the public domain and easily accessible for free with a quick search. I have also included a link to the novel in the description. Now, before we jump in, a little history on Mary Shelley, if you've never heard of her. Mary was born in 1797. Both her parents, prominent philosophers, prepared to raise their child to become a revolutionary. However, and unfortunately, Mary's mother died shortly after giving birth because that's how the 1700s rolled. Her father was extremely progressive for the time and fortunately allowed her to have a relatively extensive education for a girl. By 1814, she could reasonably be described as a radical and encountered Percy Shelley. Mary at the time was 16. He was 21, married. Their relationship is often romanticized, with them secretly meeting at her mother's grave, and she's falling for his wild, intellectual, earthly looks. She soon after ran away with him, and Mary became pregnant. While the baby did not survive, Percy's general choices and disdain for his wife Harriet did eventually cause her to drown herself. But that's enough about Percy. At some point in the future, we'll probably look at some of his poetry. Let's focus back in on Mary specifically. The loss of her first child was deeply traumatic for her, and she suffered a great depression that lasted until her next child was born. At the age of 18, she was already referring to herself as Mary Shelley and spent the summer with Percy and his friends in Geneva. That summer, it constantly rained. Every night was dark and stormy, so all these literary minds naturally told each other scary stories to pass the time. This is what led Lord Byron, one of the foremost writers of the Gothic movement, to issue a dare. Who could come up with the best horror story before summer ended? Now Mary, the youngest of the group, struggled a bit, wanting to impress her peers, until one night she was inspired. Thus was Frankenstein born, often hailed as the first piece of science fiction ever written, and again, she's only 18. The creation of this novel is already a remarkable story, but the story of Frankenstein is what we'll be analyzing over the rest of this month and a little bit in November. Depending on the version you're using, there will be minor elements that are different, and that's mainly thanks to Percy's editing over the next 2 years, but the overall story is the same. So let's jump into it. The novel Frankenstein opens with 4 letters. I've read this novel many times, and every time I do, it reminds me of Home Alone. While the opening is entertaining and generally good, it feels like it's just dressing before we get to the good stuff later on. It's easy to skip it and go straight to Victor Frankenstein's narration, but if you do that, you miss out on a ton of themes and context that will be relevant later on. You see, this is what's called a frame story. If you've ever watched Aladdin or read 1001 Nights, frame stories are kind of that thing where it opens up with that little bit at the beginning and then there's a little bit at the end, and it bookends the actual main story. Another great example would be The Princess Bride, where you have the grandfather speaking to his grandson about a story, and as he's talking to him, he's telling him the movie we're watching. Now, the first letter introduces us to Walton, the English captain of a ship heading for the North Pole. He's writing to his sister and giving off really big main character vibes. "You cannot contest the inestimable benefit which I shall confer on all mankind, to the last generation, by discovering a passage near the pole to these countries, to reach which at present so many months are requisite, or by ascertaining the secret of the magnet, which, if at all possible, can only be effected by an undertaking such as mine." The man's ambition is to change the world by undertaking a deadly venture no one has been able to achieve. All of Walton's words have this grandiose, self-important tone. He's not a bad guy. He simply thinks that he has this glorious purpose he must fulfill. He even mentions that he could have enjoyed a cushy, safe life, but that he only would be fulfilled if he does the impossible, conquering nature and having his name remembered for all time. This introduces a foundational philosophy that permeates the work: Romanticism. In short, Romanticism is the idea that nature is the source of all goodness. By extension, human development and colonization have tainted the purity of nature. Humanity's desire to conquer all is both a cause and result of this corruption. By extension, a person suffering from illness, which is like, physical, mental, otherwise, all of it can be cured by entering its purifying nature. As the letters progress, Walton admits that he is lonely. Even though he's surrounded by crewmates, few of them have the level of intellect that he does. Those that do lack his ambition or general interests, and essentially he feels isolated because he doesn't fit in with everyone else. While his expression of these things is somewhat arrogant, it is a universal problem many people deal with even in the modern day. So that persisting need for connection and feeling that they are alone despite being surrounded by potential friends, again, may seem like a modern problem, but as the story progresses, we'll see the loneliness is a very common thread for many of our characters. And what we could analyze of this based off of Mary Shelley's own experience and her life at the time, perhaps that could have given us a bit of an idea of where she was coming from. The fourth letter is where things kick into gear. We know Walton wants a friend. He's basically Lilo from Lilo and Stitch. They're slowly breaking through the miles of ice to try and reach the North Pole, and when they are on their way, they find something hidden in the deadly cold. And now, well, I'll just read it. We perceived a low carriage, fixed on a sledge and drawn by dogs, pass on towards the north. At the distance of half a mile, a being which had the shape of a man, but apparently of gigantic stature, sat in the sledge and guided the dogs. We watched the rapid progress of the traveler with our telescopes until he was lost among the distant inequalities of the ice. Now, in 2025, we can probably guess what they just saw. But if it's 1820, you're sitting by your oil lamp with this brand new book that your friends have been talking about. They didn't have TVs, so, this would be essentially somebody coming up and being like, hey, have you heard of Frankenstein? They're like, no. They go, put it on your shelf, which is, the idea of putting it on cue. And now, you are reading this book and you see some kind of giant? This was about some rando on a boat. Now there's a monster in the ice. What is happening? I went upon deck and found all the sailors busy on one side of the vessel, apparently talking to someone in the sea. It was, in fact, a sledge, like that we had seen before, which had drifted toward us in the night on a large fragment of ice. Only one dog remained alive, but there was a human being within it, whom the sailors were persuading to enter the vessel. So there's a frostbitten Englishman that happens to be on the side of your ice-encrusted ship. He's 9/10 dead already, and you know what his first question is? Which way you go? This dying man will only board the vessel if they are headed north, the same direction as the mystery man from earlier. Now with that question, we have introduced a character literally and figuratively headed the same direction as Walton. This is how we meet Victor Frankenstein. Walton is immediately enchanted by Frankenstein. He'd finally found a friend that could match his intellect. He hogs Victor to himself, nursing him back to health, and he's just generally mystified by this man's ability to have come so far alone. Walton learns that Victor has been pursuing the entity they saw earlier, and Walton shares that he is pursuing glory at the North Pole. This causes the otherwise eloquent Victor to, well, listen to this. As I spoke, a dark gloom spread over my listener's countenance. At first I perceived that he had tried to suppress his emotion. He placed his hand before his eyes, and my voice quivered and failed me as I beheld tears trickle fast from between his fingers. A groan burst from his heaving breast. I paused. At length he spoke, in broken accents. Unhappy man, do you share my madness? Have you drunk also of the intoxicating draught? Hear me, let me reveal my tale, and you will dash the cup from your lips. Now, a quick note. You've probably noticed the dramatic style that these characters tend to use. It's present throughout the whole story, and it merits some discussion. Mary Shelley is writing a story from Walton's perspective. Everything is framed by these letters. That said, after the fourth letter, the narrative perspective is Victor's and follows him for the majority of the novel. Whether the unified writing style is due to Shelley's strength of voice, or the entirety of Victor's words being filtered through Walton, is an interesting question to ask that we can't really answer definitively. That said, let's turn our focus to the content of Frankenstein's words. We can tell from the intensity of the way he speaks that he's in the depths of despair, and he blames his own ambition for what took place. Now, what we'll learn from his words as the story progresses will inform a ton about his character and some of the themes that have been seeded in these letters. Frankenstein goes on to explain that he'll be telling a grim, fantastical story that will sound unbelievable. A tale of misery derived from the pursuit of glory and knowledge. All Walton heard was that Victor would be sharing a series of stories with him, and he's going to write down every word. Even now, as I commence my task, his full-toned voice swells in my ears. His lustrous eyes dwell on me with all their melancholy sweetness. I see his thin hand raised in animation, while the lineaments of his face are irradiated by the soul within. Strange and erring must be his story, frightful the storm which he embraced the gallant vessel on its course and wrecked it. Thus, Walton is certainly enamored with Frankenstein. But as we will soon see, Victor loves only one person. And by soon, I mean the next episode on Friday. We'll be going over chapters 1 through 6, so I suggest reading at least that far in preparation. For those that have never read the novel, I encourage you to speculate in the comments considering where this tale is bound to lead. In addition, I'm curious if you would prefer a series of shorter videos like this versus a considerably longer one, covering the whole narrative at once like we did with The Raven. Until next time, Carpe Diem.